For the leader, for Yedutun, a psalm of David. Only for God does my soul wait in stillness. From God comes my salvation. God only is my rock and my salvation, my high tower. I shall not be greatly moved. How long will you set upon a person that you may slay them, all of you, as a leaning wall, a tottering fence? They only devise to thrust them down from their height, delighting in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Selah. Only for God wait you in stillness, my soul, for from God comes my hope. God only is my rock and my salvation, my high tower. I shall not be moved. Upon God rests my salvation and my glory. The rock of my strength and my refuge is in God. Trust in God at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before God. God is a refuge for us. Selah. People of low degree are vanity, and people of high degree are lies. If they be laid in the balances, together they are lighter than vanity. Trust not in oppression, and put not vain hope in robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart thereon. God has spoken once, twice I have heard this, that strength belongs to God. Also unto you, O Lord, belongs mercy. For you render to everyone according to their work. למנצח על ידותון, מזמור לדוד. אך אל אלוהים דומיה נפשי, ממנו ישועתי. אך הוא צורי וישועתי, משכבי לא אמות רבה. עד אנה תהותתו על איש, תרצחו כולכם כקיר נטוי, גדר הדחויה. אך משאתו יצאו להדיח, ירצו חזב בפיו יברכו, ובקרבם יקללו סלע. I'm Rabbi Laura Duhan-Kaplan. I teach Jewish studies and interreligious studies at the Vancouver School of Theology, and I am very happy to be here with you today to speak a little bit about Psalm 62. Psalms. Psalms can be difficult to understand. They speak directly to our hearts and sometimes not so directly to our minds. Psalms are poems, and they rely very heavily on a certain style of Hebrew Bible poetry, and that is a style that is very, very heavy in metaphors and figures of speech. When you're reading your typical psalm, you might read 2 lines with a very powerful image, perhaps one where God is an eagle. And just as your heart is feeling into that power and protection, all of a sudden the psalm shifts to a new metaphor. And all of a sudden, God is like a warrior holding a full quiver of arrows. And yes, your heart resonates with the power of that, but it can be a very quick switch for your mind to make. It helps if you accept that the psalm is going to be a jumble of images, each one designed to move you in a different way, and allow your mind to take a back seat to your heart. That's most psalms, but it's not Psalm 62. Psalm 62 is very easy to understand. It's a song in 3 parts. And we can tell where each stanza ends because the psalmist inserts the word Selah. In biblical Hebrew, Selah means musicians play a musical interlude now. This is the musical break. So we know from the word Selah that Psalm 62 is a song in 3 parts. The first part begins with something like the chorus of the song, the main repeating motif. Truly, my soul waits quietly for God. But then the psalmist lets slip the truth that their soul is actually not waiting all that quietly, because the section becomes a cry of anguish and anger to God. How long will they oppress us? Look what they are doing to us. The second part begins by reminding the psalmist how they started. Truly, truly, wait for God, my soul. Hope comes from God. Step back from the anger just for a moment and feel into the presence of God. Take some contemplative time to allow more settled emotions to come over you. There's a beautiful line in this section that you can only really appreciate from the Hebrew. This is a line that is translated, God is my rock and deliverance, my haven. The Hebrew word for haven here is misgav, which means in many contexts, a fortress. So I'll share with you a little bit about what I picture when I think of God as my fortress. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I am beset by negative thoughts. They might be about the troubles of my family. They might be about the anguish I feel being so far away from my daughter and my brother and my American relatives during the pandemic. They might be worries about their health, anguish over political oppression for so many people, or even just worries about my own health. I wake up in the middle of the night and the anger and the fear crowds in. I learned from reading the work of a 4th century Christian monk, Evagrius of Ponticus, that sometimes when you have negative thoughts, it helps to talk back to them with a biblical verse. And sometimes I use this exact verse. God is my rock and my deliverance. God is my fortress. I will not be shaken. And when I whisper that verse to myself, I imagine myself in the center of a small but open circle. I'm the only one there, and around me is a tall, tall fence protecting me. And inside that circle, I am alone with the presence of God calming me. And I have learned from doing this so many nights in the middle of the night that this verse makes it possible for me to have that time alone in conversation with God, with my negative thoughts set aside. That's part 2 of the psalm, reminding you and the psalmist reminding themselves how important it is to have ways to find that quiet prayer time, even in difficult times. Part 3 of the psalm reminds us that God has, in many different ways, conveyed to us the outlines of a plan for acting in the world. Meditating in God's presence is not the final step. It is only the middle step in this psalm. The final step tells us to go out and act in the world. How should we go out? We should go out, first of all, without fear. We should recognize that the powerful, even with all the tools in their toolkit, are temporary powers on earth. They are mere breath. They are mortals. Once we set aside the fear, the psalmist tells us, do not use violence. Do not use political corruption. Because if you do, you will not be able to establish the just order that you are working toward. One thing God has spoken, 2 things have I heard. Might belongs to God and God alone. And God, you reward each person according to their deeds. If we wish to establish a just order, we must act without violence and without corruption. They may seem to bear short-term fruit, but we will be rewarded with justice according to our just actions. I want to tell you about a young activist from the 1940s who lived into the words of this psalm. Her name is Hannah Senesh, and she is the poet who wrote the words to the song Eli, Eli, my God, the beautiful song that opens and closes today's worship. Hannah Senesh was born in Hungary, and she left there in 1940 as war was brewing in Europe, and the lives of her fellow Jews were increasingly at risk. Hannah Senesh migrated to a part of Palestine under the control of the British Empire. And in 1942, she enlisted in the British Army for a special mission. That is, to cross enemy lines and land by parachute in Yugoslavia, join up with the partisan resistance, and walk to Hungary, where they would illegally assist Jewish refugees to leave Hungary and travel back to British controlled territory with them. Hannah Senesh knew that her mission was quite possibly a suicide mission and she might not survive. And that is, in fact, what did happen. She was captured, imprisoned, and executed even before her trial was finished. We know from her writings and from the accounts of her friends what her inner process was like. It began with a cry of anguish for those left behind in Europe and caught in the march of the war and caught in the death marches toward death camps and other types of execution. It continued with her finding in her meditations out in nature that she believed in the dignity of humanity and helping to uphold that as one of her highest values. And it continued with her setting out on this mission where she was, for her comrades, very often the voice of reason. Often she encouraged her fellow soldiers not to waste their time on attacks of revenge, but to keep their mind focused on the mission of rescuing the refugees. Several of her friends said there were even times when she put her hand on their guns and said, "Do not shoot." We see the threefold process of Psalm 62, the cry of anguish, the meditation in the presence of God, and the commitment to act with integrity. The song Eli, Eli gives us a window into what her meditations were like. The English translation says, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.